Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our 11 o'clock webinar on tools gone free, what is now available, and how do I find it? I'm Nicole Bond. I am the Educational Technology Specialist here at Lincoln Intermediate Unit. This is our team who has come together to work on our LearnOn website and on these webinars. You'll see that it was a cross-divisional collaboration amongst everyone. I have highlighted here my contact information if you need to reach out to me. So I'm just going to go over a couple of Zoom webinar meeting norms. If you've been on our Zoom webinars here this morning, then you will be familiar with some of this. So first, you may have noticed that the microphone and camera have been disabled due to the large size of the attendee group. I think I saw that we are over 200. You will be able to use the question and answer panel to post questions. So remember though, when you post questions there, that they will be seen by everyone. I will either answer them verbally or my panelists will chime in and be able to answer them on the Q&A panel for you. When you do post to the chat, the panelists can see the chat, but know that the attendees cannot see the chat. So it will come to me and the panelists, and we will try to respond to you and give you the resources that you're requesting. Please also, there might be a possibility at the end, maybe we will raise hands. I can turn your microphone on if we need to, but looking at the size, we might be sticking to chat and Q&A today. At the end of this entire webinar, there will be a link sent out to you for Act 48 credit, and it will be shared. Don't know what just happened there. That's one of the links. It will also push out to our YouTube where you are going to find our list of resources, which I brought up. So your Act 48 credits, you will be redirected and you will need to use your PPID in order to receive credit for your participation in this particular webinar. The webinar archives, which came up a little early there, will be reached under this particular link for LIU LearnOn recordings. You can anticipate those a couple of hours after we finish. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, this is our resource site that we've all been working very hard on over the past week. And you will find a lot of the things that I'm talking about today are on that particular website. In fact, towards the end of this particular webinar, I'm going to go out to the website and show you exactly where you can find the resources you may be looking for. So just a reminder about the continuity of education and the free and appropriate public education. As we talk about using tools online, you might want to think about the access of your students. And I am going to spend a little bit of time talking about this, the importance of the access to the internet with your kids, and especially the idea of bandwidth and whether your students really only have access from, say, a cell phone, or if they have a school provided device, or if they're sharing access at home, or if there's multiple students on a device. These are things that we need to keep in mind as we start to think about moving our lessons online. So along with that, we need to also start to think about best practices, and you'll see a link here at the bottom of this slide deck, but I do want to talk a good bit about this. So initially, when we move our lessons online, one of the first things we really need to consider is that less is more, that it's really important to prioritize and to balance and to really choose selectively what we are asking our students to do online. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this afternoon at 1 o'clock in my Prioritize Your Lessons session, but I do want to reiterate the importance of, as you're starting to choose your tools and resources, thinking about what this is going to look like for my students. How much time is it going to take them to set up a login if they don't have a set login? Or how much time is it going to take them to figure out how this particular resource works if they're not familiar with it? Additionally, we want to remind you that when you are using video resources, to be really mindful of sharing your face. And when we do use video for streaming, say a live stream or for Zoom, or maybe you're even screencasting, think about and try to include your face and be personable. Be yourself. Your students haven't maybe seen your face in a couple of weeks. And while maybe your middle school and your high school students you don't worry about that too much, you might be a little bit surprised. Also, if you're using video, try to limit the length. Really, no video should be longer than 6 minutes long. If possible, chunk it. Do 3 sections of 2 minutes even. This helps with student engagement. Often we find that engagement drops off after 6 minutes. 6 minutes is really the maximum. So again, if you're looking at a longer video, if you have the ability to crop or chunk, that's really something that's super important to keep your students engaged in the material that you're providing them. Also, we need to be clear with our objectives and expectations. No matter what tool we're using or what resource we think is best, we need to make it clear how the resource or tool should be used. It's really helpful to also identify how much time it's going to take to complete the task whenever possible. So if you know the video is 3 minutes long, if you can include it in your hyperdoc or on the LMS where you posted it so the student knows that before they even click on that video, that would be fabulous. And lastly here, we need to organize and sequence our instructions. So offering task lists and checklists are really, really, really helpful for those students. So some of our outcomes today that I hope to cover while you're here with me. First, I would like to talk about the criteria we should use to evaluate the tools and resources that have recently gone free. I would like to talk about the differences between an online tool and an online resource. And then we're also going to explore where to find these free tools and resources on our LearnOn website. So first things first, there are so many different things that have gone free, it is completely overwhelming. If your mailbox looks anything like my mailbox, there are so many tools and resources you may not know where to start. So when we're deciding, there's a lot of things that we have to keep in mind. This link right here is to a great eLearn rubric. It's a great tool. I'm going to show it to you, but I'm going to give you a caveat. It is very long. It's a great tool when we're not trying to spin up an online class in maybe a couple of days. You'll see that there's lots of different things that we need to take into consideration typically when we use a tool. Access functionality, how students sign in and sign up, archiving, collaboration, user accountability, et cetera, et cetera. And this is a fabulous resource when we have the time to vet tools properly. Unfortunately, that may not be the case. As is, and I cannot get out of this window. Ah, there we go. So I'm going to come back here. So this is the checklist you should be using. And that one's from Western University. So what you really need to think about right now, is it approved or suggested by your district? That's really the first place that you should look. It should not be necessarily all the free resources that are being sent to your email right now and everyone's tweeting about and sending to their Facebook groups. But what is it your district is already suggesting or has already approved? Chances are your district may have a list, a COPA list, for example, that you would use. All right, do they already have resources that they have identified that integrate with whatever learning management tool that you might already have? So for instance, if you use Schoology, or you use Canvas, or you use Google Classroom, those are integrations that you might want to be mindful of. If you've already had students uploaded into an LMS and that tool integrates right into that LMS, that's going to make your decision a little bit easier. The other thing that we want you to think about is bandwidth concerns. All right. Right now, some of you might be experiencing bandwidth concerns, but I want you to think about next week when the vast majority of students, possibly across the country, are trying to get online to Zoom, who are trying to get online to possibly access your video screencast. All right. So think about what the bandwidth concerns might be. Even if you think all of your students do have computer access, this might be something that you want to plan for. Are you familiar with the tool, or is it new to you? If this is a tool that you've never used before, is it the best use of your time to sit and try to figure out how it works? Or are you pretty tech savvy and probably be able to spin it up really fast? And then secondly to that, is that a tool that your students are familiar with? Because you might be able to spin it up really quick and get it rolling, but your students maybe have never used it before, or the parents of your students don't even know where to go to log in. So this is the other section that you really have to think about. Additionally, maybe it's a tool your students have been using with another teacher all year long. So you know your students are ready for it, you just weren't ready for it, and now you gotta be ready for it. Or maybe it's a tool they used last year with the teacher they had in the previous year. So think about your students from that perspective before you decide if you're definitely gonna go with a tool that you're not particularly familiar with. And then this one's kind of important. It's really exciting to see all of those free tools rolling in, but are you going to have to pay for it later? So it's really great if you design some fantastic ideas in a tool that maybe BrainPop, for instance, that your school doesn't subscribe to, but is now currently free to you. But then find out next year when you roll this around and you maybe wanted to do a blended environment in your classroom, you can't use the things that you designed because that tool is no longer free and your district isn't going to subscribe to it. So that is also something that we want to keep in mind. We want to try to use tools that we know we're going to have access to later, whether our district subscribes to them or they are always free. So I see the question in the chat, and this is exactly where I'm going. How do we know how to plan for bandwidth? So this particular chart by Daniel Stanford is a fantastic resource that I would use as a guide. What you'll notice up at the top is high bandwidth. The top two pieces here, the one in yellow and red, that's for students with high bandwidth. That's when we know, hey, the internet is rolling and we're doing fine. Down here is for lower bandwidth. So that's where maybe we need to go if we're not sure what the bandwidth is going to look like. Over here is high immediacy. That means things that we can do quickly and respond to quickly. And to the left is the low immediacy, things that might take some time to complete and have running. You have an idea of how much time you have to get your lessons online. And you have enough time to think about, is bandwidth going to be a problem? So if you look in the upper right corner, we have our high immediacy, high bandwidth. That's where we have video conferencing, and that's where we have audio conferencing. What I'm doing right now to you is sharing my video with you. That's going to be a high bandwidth resource, but you'll notice we turned off all of your videos. That wasn't just necessarily because we didn't want everyone distracting each other with videos. That is also because when it comes to video, it's a high bandwidth resource. And if we are streaming every single person's video in this particular webinar, that could be a bandwidth concern. So sometimes doing functions like that or turning off others' audio are ways to help mitigate that. But it's also something to consider when you are dealing with what could be a potential bandwidth issue in the coming weeks. We don't know. So it would be great to plan for collaborative documents. Do you have a document set aside like a HyperDoc or a Google Doc where questions can be typed in by students? Do students have access to contact you through email if they need to? Or is there another means, like a discussion board? All right, is there another way that you can do readings with text and images? So just planning and having that in mind is a good place to start. You may want to start up here with video conferences, but that might not be the best choice for you to linger. It may be worth having these kind of in your back pocket as you start to look at tools. All right, ask yourself, is it a collaborative document? Is it mostly text-based? Once we start to add audio and video, that's where you can, if you have a bandwidth issue, come in to some challenges. So the next piece that we want to think about when we're thinking about tools and resources is just that. What is a tool and what is a resource? So a tool is essentially how you deliver your content. So in the classroom, it may have been that you, like this guy, did direct instruction, where you would stand and explain something for 10 minutes before students would then move and do something else. What is that direct instruction going to look like? So the tools for delivering direct instruction. Over here, the idea of maybe students collaborating. How are you going to get those students to collaborate again and work on a group project? Or how are they going to discuss something in class when maybe you had a discussion and you would lead it and facilitate it, and now you're not necessarily going to be able to be right there leading and facilitating? And then the idea of even science labs. Think about that hands-on of using a science lab and having students manipulate with the materials and experiment. Those are all things that we're going to look at tools for. And it's all about delivery, creation, and manipulation. The other side of the coin is over here on the right-hand side when it comes to resources. When it comes to resources, resources are all about content. So that's the idea of the textbook that now is sitting in a locker in a school building that nobody can get to. All right, can we find a way, does that textbook have an online option? Do we have access to it? Or can I find other resources besides a textbook that would have been in maybe the same unit that I was going to teach or that I still need to teach? Additionally, the idea of video. What videos can I find to maybe supplement? Maybe we were gonna read it, but you know what? I'm gonna have to use a video, or maybe I'm not because I'm concerned about bandwidth. These are all things that we have to weigh when we're looking at tools and at resources. So this is where I'm going to take us out to our website. You're going to find a lot of tools and resources that we've identified on our LearnOn website. And just to lay it out, it's under the For Educators button, and it's under step 5. So I'm going to take you there so that we can go and explore it, and I'm going to hopefully find my tab again when we do this. All right, so this is our LearnOn website, and this is what the homepage looks like. You're going to find For Educators in 2 locations. You're going to find up here where you can click right into a whole bunch of menus, and you're going to find it down here on the button. I'm going to take us to the button first because I do want to point out where we should be in the planning process before we really start to vet our tools. So this is a step-by-step guide on what you can do to get yourself started. And this morning, we talked about a lot of these. Steps 1, 2, 3, and 4. Ben went over a lot of this information during his first 2 webinars. So I'm down here at step 5, considering the tools. So as we go down here to consider the tools, you'll notice we have our tools identified as free online tools and content resources. The first thing I'm going to do is go in and show you the free online tools so that you can get an idea. So remember, the tools are how we deliver our content. So when you go into free online tools, we have them organized so that you can think about them from what it would have been like in your classroom in a face-to-face scenario. So as we scroll down, think about what these things would have looked like in a face-to-face classroom. The idea of assessments and quizzes, or checks for understanding, the direct instruction, the games maybe that you used to play in your classroom to help students review and learn, the group discussion, the collaboration, the labs, the read and respond, et cetera, student questions, video. So what I'm going to do is actually jump in here so you can get an idea. All of these are collapsible. So you'll see in direct instruction, we've identified some tools: Zoom, live streaming, Google Slides, Screencastify, Loom, and Nearpod. So when you're looking at a tool or looking at a host of tools like this, you need to think about a couple of things that we've talked about. The bandwidth. All right, am I going to be able to do Zoom synchronously, or maybe should I be looking at Loom, which is an asynchronous tool? Am I thinking about, and this is a good question that I just saw that popped up. I feel like I have a lot of students who have iPads, so many sources that require Flash. That's a fabulous concern, and that's a fabulous point. A lot of times when you go into these, you can look under their About section, and they will really quickly tell you about where you need to go to, or whether or not they work on an iPad. Anything that uses Flash I would avoid at this point. I wouldn't even consider it unless you're really in a bind. Flash isn't going to work on your iPad, so that could be a concern. And some things have iPad apps, while they may not have an app for the iPad in other instances. So that might be something else that you want to think about and consider while you're going through and looking at these. So as I look at these resources, I need to think about my bandwidth. I need to think about the resources that my students have access to and what they look like. So again, these are the tools for delivery. And we've only listed them in here if they're currently free or free for now, meaning during the COVID closures. The next location I'm going to take you to is to the content resources. So your online content resources, which if you saw me, I was up here at educators and came down to online content resources. You're going to find long lists by content of resources. What you'll find after each one is it's identified if it's free during COVID-19, like in the instance of Discovery Ed, and some of you might go or be part of a district where you usually have Discovery Education. So it's not a big deal that it's only free during COVID-19 because your district does subscribe to it. So that's something to keep in mind. Or you might be looking at something always free, like the OER Commons or the OER Remote Learning Hub that now has a lot of resources available in it. The other consideration that you might be thinking about, especially when we're thinking about free and appropriate education, is can I print it? So we've tried to identify in here a lot of them that have PDFs which are printable. And a lot of the major subjects, we also have links to ebooks and audiobooks that are currently free and accessible. And in some cases, we have a list of printable resources so that if you know you have to print everything out, there are resources in here for printing. Podcasts, and in many of them, we have literacy or a math intervention. We have information for more intensive support. So for example, if I go down here to math, you're going to find the same thing, printables and interventions, so that there are a number of tools and resources for you to look at. But what I want to do is to really come back to your idea, that question of what are really the tools that I need to be using and why are they best for me? Most of that site is free, entirely free. A lot of the tools, a lot of those resources, completely free. So I want you to reflect. What is approved or suggested by your district? Start there. Don't start with the overwhelming list of tools. Start with what you know you can definitely use. All right? Think about your bandwidth concerns. You know your students. You know your district. You know what you might be dealing with in the next couple of weeks, especially as more and more individuals go online, especially as when we think about our students possibly working at home with maybe 2 or 3 siblings who are also trying to get online to do this work, and their parents working from home as well. Think about your bandwidth concerns when you start to really think about this. Are you familiar with the tool? Sorry. Are you familiar with the tool, or is it new? And are your students familiar with it, or is it new to them? If it's not new to them and they're familiar with it, is it worth you taking the time to learn it? And then if it's free for now, is it free for now? Or are you going to have to pay for it later? So I'm going to come into the chat here and get an idea of some of the questions that we have left and have addressed. All right, so I keep hearing the idea that teachers need to consider bandwidth. Is there a better time of day for students to access material online in terms of bandwidth? I would say that we're not certain that there is a better time of day for bandwidth. You would almost want to think that it might be in the afternoon after parents are done working online, but in such an uncertain time when there's a very good potential that everybody's on the internet all the time. And what we've been seeing trend-wise is that bandwidth-wise across the nation at this point, the amount of internet bandwidth that's being used is so much larger. So I'm going to tell you, it's going to be tough. We're going to have to trial and error it. You're going to have to see what works for you. And I think it really does come back to that idea of just having grace, being open to, you know what, we're all going to try things that maybe don't stick or fly the first time we try them. And we need to be okay with that. We need to be okay with sometimes we're going to try a tool and we had it vetted. We've used it before. There's no problem with it. We're ready to roll. We've got this. And then it sinks. But, you know, we're all in it together. And we're all dealing with, you know, the same tabs that don't open when you want them to, or possibly the tool that seemed like a great idea until you found out that, you know, the bandwidth isn't working. So you're maybe not going to be able to do that Zoom session office hour where you can walk everyone through how to use the tool. So that I think that idea of flexibility and really accepting the fact that we're all going to make mistakes and we're all going to just simply do the best we can. And it's really about that idea of grace. We have to do the best we can. So as we're wrapping up, I just want to remind you that we have several different webinars available today. If you go back to our LearnOn website, you're going to find them on the front page. I believe that Tanya's next, and she's actually going to be talking about at noon some of our teaching and consulting resources. So you will be able to access those there. And if, again, that's the LearnOn website. If you need to get to any of those tools that I showed you or any of those resources, which I showed you, you will be able to get them from there. And as I finish up here, we really appreciate you taking your time to fill out our web eval and or our Learn on Act 48 resource as that comes through. And I see a couple of questions here, so I am going to stop for a second and see what I can answer that's in our Q&A box. So let me see. Sarah, we have been using Schoology. I have not used it before, but after a few YouTube videos, it looks pretty easy to work with. I have used Schoology in the past, Sarah, and I will be honest, I thought it was pretty user-friendly. If you are familiar with, say, Facebook, I feel like it kind of has the same interface as Facebook. So if that's a tool that you're starting to look at, maybe you haven't looked at closely, I would do that. But again, if your students have no experience or what have you, I would keep that in mind. Think about not just the YouTube videos you've watched, but can you find resources to send to parents and to send to students so that they definitely get to understanding it as well. So I would think about that. And yes, it is going to be hard teaching art with an LMS. My hope would be the cell phone. If you can get students to take pictures and submit pictures, that might be your in. All right, Karen, how do we determine if a service is FERPA compliant for IEP meetings? So the first thing I would tell you is to go into the terms and services and look at what is actually shared. When it comes to FERPA compliance, we actually have a fabulous tool that I might be able to bring up here really quickly at the end. When I get done fighting my tab. That is called send.firefox.com. This is a resource that we are really suggesting and we've vetted with our pool council even. This resource will allow you to send a file to anyone, and it is completely encrypted. It'll allow you to send, like in a separate email, a password. It allows you to identify how long you want to allow someone to download that file, so you can set it to like 24 hours, and it will allow you to, I'm trying to think, determine how many downloads are even in there. So you can send up 2.5 gigabytes. It doesn't even require you to sign in. You can set up a login. Thanks, Ben. I didn't share my screen. I guess that would be something that would be important, huh? Here we go. Sorry about that. So if you look, this is Firefox Send. It's send.firefox.com. And you'll see here where it says drag and drop. You can literally drag and drop files into the, I guess it helps if I hit share. So you can literally drag and drop files into this particular plus sign, and it'll encrypt them so that when you send them, the other individual needs a password to open them. It doesn't require a login, and you can send to 2.5 gigabytes. So I know with the FERPA questions, that seems to be an area that we can, that this seems to be a solution for that FERPA issue of sharing an IEP with a parent, because it's encrypted and it is not then read by other sources. So I hope that really helps you find some resources to help bring your learning online. I appreciate all the questions, guys. And as I end this, this should push you out to take that Act 48.